All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Arlo McGinn, and I work for Hannifin, and came here from Salt Lake City, Utah. And so I think most everyone here might be a little bit familiar with Hannifin. It's a very large company, but one aspect that you may not be familiar with is what we do in the Engineered Polymer Systems division. And Hannifin and we in Salt Lake actually manufacture and design materials for medical applications. And so in Salt Lake City, we've been performing urethane synthesis, and over the last several years, we've switched over to also adding in medical grade urethanes, which we manufacture and process in ISO certified clean rooms. So as a bit of background to urethanes and increasing technology and materials in medical devices, we live in a very changing regulatory environment, both in the US and also here in the UK and European Union. And in the US, FDA recalls in medical devices have been steadily increasing over the years. It's due to several or quite a few factors, including increased scrutiny and evaluation of devices. And then also, as medic devices improve, they're getting more complex and they do more interesting things. But as a result of this, with all this technology that's being built into devices, the time to approval is increasing, and as a result, when you have a recall, it becomes a much more expensive process to go through that. So as a bit of background, from a very high level, if you're wondering, well, why might I use a urethane, and why are urethanes good in medical devices? Urethanes have very good mechanical strength. They've been shown and used in biological systems for many years, and they have been shown to have very good bio and hemocompatibility. And so, as a bit of background over to how a urethane is actually made, there's actually two common synthesis techniques for doing this. The technique that I have here is called the Pre Polymer Method, and the other technique is just kind of an all-in-one, one-pot synthesis technique. And with a urethane, it involves a reaction of a polyol, or actually a hydroxyl group, with an isocyanate. And with a one-pot mix, all you do is you add kind of 3 ingredients together, put them in a pot, mix them together, and it'll form into a urethane. However, when you want more control over the end characteristics of the device or of the material, then you use this technique, which is called the Pre Polymer Method. And so this involves reacting a polyol, which, as its name implies, is a diol, or hydroxyls on both ends, of a very long chain chemical. And these are commonly esters, ethers, and other carbonates. And then you react those with a diisocyanate. And so initially you form this pre-polymer, which links together the polyols. And then to complete the synthesis, you add in a small molecular weight chain extender. And again, it's a diol chemistry, and then that will form your urethane. And what's unique about urethanes, and what gives them some of their excellent characteristics for use in medical devices, is they're actually considered a segmented polymer, and that they're formed of what are termed soft segments, which give flexibility to the polymer. One interesting thing, an important thing for medical devices, is urethanes are plasticizer free. And so this soft segment right here is what allows you to eliminate plasticizers, and so you don't have concerns with phthalates and other potential carcinogens or harmful chemicals in it. And then the hard segments are formed from the diisocyanates and the chain extenders. And these are what give the urethanes their very high strength. And so once you form these urethanes, the molecules actually align within the material, and you have your soft segments kind of gather together, and your hard segments gather together, and it's called microphase separation. And so that's what gives the urethanes a lot of the strength is the interaction of the hard segment to hard segment to hard segment, kind of stacking together. So urethanes are not only used in medical devices, we see them everywhere in the world around us. And they have very different characteristics depending on really just the chemistry of those chemical agents that you're mixing together. You can form anything from a foam, a rigid foam, like you might see in a insulating application, from athletic shoes to the foam that's in those, and all the way over to a much, much harder, like in a bowling ball. Those are all urethane applications. So, but in medical devices, the most common chemistries that you'll see for the soft segments are polyesters, polyethers, and polycarbonates. And I'll go into a little more detail about kind of the benefits, pros and cons of each of those later. And then for the hard segments, you really just have kind of two classifications of aromatic hard segments and aliphatic hard segments. So the polyester-based urethanes were some of the first, or were the first urethanes that were used in medical device applications. These were used over 30, 40 years ago. And the benefit of the polyesters is they have the best mechanical strength of the urethanes that are available to us today. However, those who are familiar with chemistry, and especially with ester chemistry, know that an ester bond is not a very water-stable bond. And so, you put this in a warm and a wet environment that has a lot of active chemicals, and these are very rapidly hydrolyzed. And so the polymers will break down. And so those are some of the shortcomings of the polyesters early on. So in response to that, they moved from a polyester-based more over to a polyether-based. The ethers are much, much more stable in water and resistant to hydrolysis. However, what they found, and there was actually quite a few recalls and big concerns in the early 80s, late 70s, about pacemaker leads that were manufactured from polyether-based urethanes. And one of the reasons that they wanted to initially move to urethane is they were using silicons before, but the silicons require a much thicker wall, and you lose a lot of real estate by going to those. So the urethanes, because of their high strength, you can use a much thinner wall. And so the problems that they were found though with the ethers is when they were failing getting shorts in the pacemaker leads, is the ether groups are susceptible to oxidative degradation. So in response to these issues, they've developed polycarbonate based, and it's kind of a happy medium between both of them. They're much better, show much better resistance to water hydrolysis than the polyesters, and on the other side, they show much better resistance to oxidative degradation than the polyethers. And so a lot of the urethanes that are currently in use, these are becoming a more common and a more popular form. So looking at the hard segments, there's really two classifications there. You have aromatic hard segments and aliphatic. And so the aromatic hard segments are based around, obviously, aromatic diisocyanates. You have the two isocyanates here, and these are two very commonly used diisocyanates for urethanes. And so they're based around aromatic, resonant electron structures. And the benefits of these is they have, by far, the best mechanical strength, and they're relatively low price. So these are very commonly used, especially for the industrial applications. And so there's a lot of these compounds that are available. So the negatives, though, when you're looking at maybe building a medical device with an aromatic hard segment, is they've been shown to yellow over time and after exposure to heat or sterilization conditions. And now, it doesn't necessarily mean that they lose a lot of their mechanical strength. However, in the medical fields, there's less tolerance towards having a device that's changing color, and you stick it in an autoclave or you stick it in a sterilization cycle, and it comes out yellow, and the assumption is there's going to be something wrong with that, or the patient doesn't want it to be used. And there's also concern that the aromatic compounds can degrade into carcinogens. And so it's known that they break down, and instead of the diisocyanate, they form dianylines, diamines, and there's concern that these might be carcinogenic. So the other hard segments that are used are these aliphatic based. And you can actually see that these are, essentially the same compounds, but the aromaticity has been removed from them. So the benefits of these is there's no discoloration with these compounds. They're more UV resistant, sterilization resistant. The negatives, though, are higher cost, which ends up being passed along to manufacturers. Lower mechanical properties. But in this case, it's like, well, the lower mechanical properties might be a concern for an industrial application, but usually for the medical devices, the urethanes are so strong that you're typically not, really kind of pushing their limits. And so this lower strength isn't too much of a concern. And then the last negative, which we'll be talking more about, is their increased susceptibility to stress cracking. So TPUs, or the urethanes in a biological system degrade primarily by three mechanisms. So one that I talked about is the hydrolysis, or water cleavage, oxidation, and then the last one, and a very important one, is considered this environmental stress cracking. So the hydrolysis is cleavage with reaction of water, and obviously we're primarily composed of water, and it can be catalyzed in both acids and bases, and some of these urethanes are more susceptible to acid-base hydrolysis, and some of them are more susceptible to the base or the other hydrolysis techniques or methods. And so by relative susceptibility, the polyethers are by far the best, the most stable, followed by the polycarbonates and the polyesters. So the oxidation, we're very, there's a lot of chemistry happening, and there's a lot of, we have very oxidative environments, and so these urethanes can be exposed to them, peroxide, metal ions, which can induce peroxide formation. And of these, the polyethers are really the only ones that show the biggest problem to this degradation mechanism. So one of the most important mechanisms for degradation in urethanes and a lot of polymers is what's termed environmental stress cracking. And so stress cracking as a degradation mechanism is a little unique from the other ones in that it involves, you need to have two ingredients for that to happen. The first is you need to have an active chemical, so it can be water or an oxidative environment. And then the second thing is you actually need to have an external force on the device, or stress. Okay? And the stress, the most obvious source of the stress would be external. So you take a device and you bend it, or maybe it's inserted in the body and someone flexes or moves around, and so that can place a stress on it. However, what can be commonly overlooked are other sources of stress that are inherent in the polymer, even as it's just sitting there as a straight, maybe a straight tube on the table. And so some of these internal stresses can arise from just that soft segment, hard segment, internal separation within the compound. And then another source can actually be during the processing. And so you can stress these polymers by say you're extruding and it's coming from a very hot extrusion tip and extruding into a water bath. And so that very fast, rapid temperature change can then form these stress gradients within it. And then you expose it to a chemical environment and it starts breaking down very quickly. So what we wanted to do is evaluate some aliphatic polycarbonates, which are becoming more common for use in medical devices, against a formulation that we developed in order to overcome the susceptibility of these compounds to stress cracking. And so we tested these in acidic hydrochloric acid, alkaline potassium hydroxide, and neutral saline also. And so what we've done here is this is just a 10 French tube that was kinked to create a stress riser, to accelerate this so we can see this under lab conditions, in a relatively short period of time. And then we also compared it against another class of urethanes called the aliphatic ethers, just to make sure that we're looking at other chemistries. So the first thing we looked at is the acid stability of these. And so this is just a tensile strength. So these tubes were kinked and inserted, let to soak in an acid environment at temperature. and then removed from the solutions at these days and tested for tensile strength. And so what we can see here is that there's actually, relatively, small change over time between the compounds. And if you look at the axis over here, this is actually more indicative of just softening and of the polymers actually absorbing water. And the urethanes are actually, and this is the medical systems or medical applications, this is actually considered a positive, and that if you have a catheter, then you insert it, and it absorbs a little bit of water, and it softens. And it makes it a little more tolerable for the patient who has to maybe have a catheter in or a feeding tube in for a longer period of time. Okay? And so what we're seeing here is that there was really very little difference, no failure in any of these compounds aside from that initial softening after hydration. Okay. So looking at neutral saline, again, we see very similar results. They soften over time, maybe the aliphatic ethers less so, but not too much of a difference over time. However, when we put these into a basic solution, then you actually start to see very differences in the chemistries of these compounds. And so what we can see here is the aliphatic carbonates, which is the 2 and the 3 right here, are degrading over time and losing tensile strength. And whereas the ethers are staying really strong, but that's kind of a known side effect of the chemistry of the ether's resistance to hydrolysis. And so when we actually start looking at these compounds visually, what you can see is that that cracking is very apparent. And so even here at day 1 for this aliphatic carbonate 2, this cracking, you can see it's starting to open up the tube even just after 24 hours. And the same for the other aliphatics, maybe a little less apparent here at day 1, but day 3, day 6, they start to open up. And so when you go back and look here, you can see even at day 1 is showing relatively high pull strengths. However, visually they're starting to degrade. And this could be a serious concern with a medical device, that it's starting to break down and flake off and leave bits behind. And so we've been working to develop an aliphatic carbonate that shows decreased susceptibility to that degradation by environmental stress cracking. And you can see our results here are very similar to what we'd seen for the acids and also for the neutral saline, in that we soften initially and then hold over time, whereas a lot of the other carbonates that are available will degrade in a basic solution very quickly. So when you consider all of this, though, you just look, you're like, well, the ethers are holding up really well, both in base, both in saline, and in acids. So why might we not want to use a chemistry like an ether for, say, a catheter application? Well, one of the concerns with ethers is they can discolor. And so these are these ether tubes, which from day 0 on the top to day 6, and you see the yellow over time, which can be a concern. But you need to bear in mind that the aqueous solutions, or the actual conditions, might be more than you initially considered. And so urethanes are also exposed to other chemicals, and especially for catheter applications, one common chemical family are alcohols. And so they're commonly used like ethanol and isopropyl alcohol. They commonly come in contact with these medical devices. For a catheter application, say you have a PICC line or a central line, ethanol locks are still popular in a lot. And this is actually when they take ethanol and they flood the catheter with it. And they allow it to dwell there for up to 2 hours, and that will kill the microbes that are in there, as these catheter-related bloodstream infections are a serious problem in hospitals. And then isopropyl alcohol are very common cleaning solutions, and so they might be exposed to these also. And so the alcohol compatibility is primarily driven by the soft segment in these, with their susceptibility to degradation and also the degree of swelling. So when we look at the ethanol absorption of these polymers, you can see there's a very large difference between the families and the aliphatic carbonates and the ethers. And so from 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 1 hour, 2 hours, you can see with over just a 2-hour period at 37C, the aliphatic ethers absorb 70% of their weight in ethanol. And so they're almost like an ethanol sponge. You know, they just kind of take it and they absorb a lot of it. They swell quite a bit, both radially and longitudinally. And that their longitudinal swelling can be, about, like an extra like 40% or so. So it's quite significant. However, the aliphatic carbonates don't absorb as much, and they're less. They're more resistant to those ethanols, and so you can see after 2 hours, it's only around 20%. So with isopropyl alcohol, you see the same pattern. The aliphatic ethers absorb quite a bit in 2 hours, which is a short period of time. They absorb approximately 50% versus, again, only 20% for the carbonates. And now while a direct soak in isopropyl alcohol is not very common, I really can't think of an application, it is very common to swab and clean a lot of devices with these. And we have heard of cases of people like after continuous swabbing of a device that's maybe in for 30, 60 or longer days, that you'll start to get cracking and delamination of the device. And so looking at the compatibility in a variety of solutions, especially in alcohols, is important. So ultimately, what I hope to take home here is that, it's like when you're looking at using a urethane, I think a lot of people consider a urethane as, kind of one polymer. The same way you might consider a polypropylene or something like that. And it's a very large family. And when you're looking at choosing a urethane for medical devices, that you need to consider a lot of factors, such as the mechanical properties that you're looking for, what chemicals it's going to be exposed to, the external stresses that are placed on the device, and ultimately, because the devices can be exposed to such a broad array of chemicals, having urethanes that also show that same broad compatibility is a must. So with that, then I'll take any questions.
What was the shore hardness of the materials that you were testing? So
that's another benefit of the urethanes, is they can be formed in such that large shore. These are at a 95A. Actually quite a bit. And so it's shown that, as you have, like a lot of the immune response mounted, and like, say you have like macrophages that will maybe attach and attack a urethane or a tube that's inserted, then, they kind of have those external peroxides that are kind of generated and formed, and so it really does accelerate that degradation of these. So one of the reasons that the urethanes are used is they're not immune or to that attachment, but they're not a very good attachment surface compared to other polymers that are available.
How do you feel about using polyurethanes in heart valves where tolerances are actually critical? We talked about dimensional instability. There's been some animal studies done where you get stenosis occurring pretty much straight away because the material starts to swell. Unfortunately, it has quite a catastrophic effect on the animal.
I can imagine. In what application? Sorry.
In cardiovascular, in heart valves, because it seems to be the next generation heart valve is made out of polyurethane. You don't need to take anticoagulants.
Yeah, well, I'd say with that, it's going to, again, depend on the chemistry of the urethanes. And I showed a lot of data on the alcohol absorption, which translates into swelling in alcohol solutions. But there's a lot of carryover based on, or for the same application in water swelling and water absorption.